Hi, everyone. I'm Maureen Droney, and I'm here to welcome you to our first episode of The Forum, presented by the Recording Academy Producers and Engineers Wing. The Forum is intended to be an ongoing monthly series with its content determined by what our P&E Wing members, that's you, telling us what topics you want to hear and learn more about. As you know, today's topic is immersive audio, what we've learned, featuring two prolific immersive mixers. There will be time for some Q&A with our panelists after the conversation. So please put your questions in the Q&A Zoom function at the bottom of your screen. For other communications, please just use the chat function. Now, I want to introduce you to the hosts of the forum. So here we go. Jordan Brooke Hamlin is a Nashville-based composer, engineer, producer, and multi-instrumentalist. A lifelong advocate for creatives, she is the owner of a 20-acre recording studio, production house, and retreat space called Moxie in Nashville. Jordan has produced and/or engineered for the Grammy-winning duo Indigo Girls and for KT Tunstall, Tenille Townes, Allison Russell, Rufus Wainwright, and many more. As a touring and session musician, Jordan's contributions include collaborations with Brandi Carlile, Missy Higgins, Loudon Wainwright III, Dar Williams, the Secret Sisters, and the Nashville Ballet, again, among many others. And now producer, engineer, and business owner Glenn Lorbecki, our other host, established his career with such diverse artists as the Violent Femmes, Dizzy Gillespie, and Alicia Keys. His collaborations with a bunch of acronyms, MTV, CBS, PBS, and ABC, along with Sony and Microsoft, include numerous recordings, broadcast productions, and TV, film, and game soundtracks. Glenn is part of the award-winning Grammy Awards broadcast mix team, having just completed working on the 66th Grammy telecast on CBS. Some of his work in immersive audio is on a permanent exhibit at the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles. Glenn's latest project is mixing the immersive soundtrack for Destiny 2, the hit video game from Bungie. So now please welcome our hosts, Glenn Lorbecki and Jordan Hamlin.
Thank you, Maureen.
Hey, everybody.
We are so excited to be here, Glenn. I'm just going to go ahead and speak for you from the top. We're so excited to be here. We're excited that you're here. This is such an interesting and complex and fresh new topic that I'm excited to take a view from this lens with a sort of unique combo, which is a duo mixing. Matt Wallace and Will Kennedy are here with us today. Let's welcome them. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
Before we get to know you collectively, let's get to know you individually a little bit. Matt Wallace is a multi-platinum selling producer, mixer, who started out in a garage studio recording local musicians, including a few who formed rock band Faith No More. Matt produced, recorded, and mixed their iconic We Care a Lot, Epic, and Easy, along with their album, The Real Thing, which garnered 2 Grammy nominations, and their album, Angel Dust, named by Kerrang one of the number one most influential album of all time. Matt also produced acclaimed albums for The Replacements and OAR, and produced and mixed Maroon 5's Songs About Jane, with its 4 top 40 singles, 2 Grammy Awards, 15 million copies sold worldwide, and over 2 billion streams on Spotify. Since then, Matt has worked with a variety of artists, including Andy Grammer, Three Doors Down, Hoobastank, and Eric Gales. Since the advent of Atmos spatial immersive technology, Matt has been on the vanguard, working with his partner, Will Kennedy, for a variety of labels and artists, both catalog and frontline. Glad to have you, Matt.
Thanks for inviting us.
And before I introduce Will, I just have to say, I'm not going to fanboy out too hard here, Matt, but when that album, that Faith No More album came out, we all, in every studio around the world, we were trying to figure out how you got the guitar sound. It was just unbelievable. Great record.
Thank you. You could say I played those guitars, but I didn't.
But you were there.
Yes, I was there.
Our other panelist today, Will Kennedy, is a platinum-selling producer, mixer, and recording engineer whose credits include U2, OAR, One Republic, Michael Franti and Spearhead, and the 88's At Least It Was Here, the theme from the hit television series Community. Along with music for social media platform TikTok and Disney franchises, High School Musical and Zombies, dude. Will earned his stripes at world-class recording studios Ocean Way, Nashville, and Right Track Recording before finally landing in Los Angeles. He was music producer on the East African singing contest Maisha Superstar, co-founded the influential recording business podcast Mix Notes from Hell. We've all been there. And has served as a guest lecturer at the prestigious Interlochen Center for the Arts. In 2021, Will teamed up with longtime friend and collaborator Matt to create Studio Deluxe Immersive, located in the iconic Sound City Center, say that 3 times fast, in Los Angeles. To date, they've mixed over 200 songs for Dolby Atmos, including projects for the B-52s, Black Sabbath, Selena Gomez, Jason Mraz, Dave Matthews Band, Faith No More, Tank, and the Bangas. Bangas, sorry, I was being all Euro. Group Love, and more, along with the other immersive formats, and have become 2 of the foremost voices in the immersive music space. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. What an incredible honor.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Maureen spoke with you folks a while ago and had mentioned that you had a group of mixers that got together to talk about the challenges that you faced in immersive audio. And so I'm not sure if you want to work that in to the conversation or if you want to address that right up front, but that damn group, as it were, is an acronym for
Dolby Atmos Mixers Network. Yeah, I mean, that's a good place to start, honestly, because as we made the transition from stereo mixing into Atmos, the learning curve was exponential and much more beyond what we had imagined. And because there were no kind of rules or guidebooks or guardrails, and no kind of elder statesman we could refer to and say, hey, how do you do this? We kind of had to make it up as we went along. And what was really nice about this group is that it really created a sense of community where even though we were all kind of competitors with each other, we also were exceptionally supportive. Like if one was like, hey, I don't know how this piece of gear works, what do you do? And then Will would be like, well, I read the manual back and forwards 3 times. Here's how you can get it running. And so new software, new technology. And it was really, I think all of us were basically thrown in the deep end and said, good luck and swim. So that was the reason the group was put together. And as our friend Steve Jenowick said, it's basically just a bunch of
idiots on a text chain.
That's really what it is. It's actually diffuse, informal. There's no central agency. It's just like we just get on there. We go, how does this work? I don't know. And there you go. So that's really what it is. But it's been exceptionally informative. And again, the sense of community, which is lost over the years because of everyone's kind of hibernating in their own little spaces. This is a nice way we kind of extend ourselves either over Zoom or in person and just be really supportive. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah, it was really founded out of, in 2024, we're used to all kind of having access to all the information all the time. And in stereo, we've got 60 years of history to lean back on, and so many books and so many manuals and just so much information out there that it was sort of shocking to find ourselves as I think I may be wrong about this, but when we put our system together, there were fewer than 20 Atmos music studios, maybe even fewer than that in the world. And even, and so that many people were doing the work. Nobody had a depth of experience. So we were all kind of casting around, short of like Steve Jenowick had been doing it for quite a while, but even that is like, as he's working, they're constantly changing the technology to make it better and better. So what he's doing on Monday, he may have to take a different approach on Friday. So by the time we got in, he had some great things to tell us and guided us in good directions. But even then, it's all changing so fast, and you can't go to YouTube and find information. You can read manuals, but they may change the software in a week. So it was just us finding a way to support one another at a time when we needed access to one another's shared knowledge, because there was so little of it.
Yeah.
Shared knowledge, I feel like, is the key to so much in this industry, and having communication between producers, engineers. It sounds like you really put together the community that you needed to make the work happen. So take us to that moment of your first official immersive mix. What was the transition like? What knowledge between stereo was brought over, and what went out the window?
Right. Well, first of all, we had to kind of create some kind of recorded mixed calling cards, because we were calling ourselves Atmos mixers, but we really had only been kind of mixing on our own to kind of get our feet on the ground. And so we, for better or for worse, we had to do some of the Faith No More stuff that I had done previously, but I had no actual multi-track. So Will and I pulled down from...
It was the stems from that were created for the Rock Band video game.
So there were five stems for the song Epic, and Will and I put this thing together. We had the folks from Rhino and Warner Brothers come over. We were hoping to kind of impress them with what we were able to do. And because we were so limited with the stems, honestly, the mix was subpar. We did do a Maroon 5 one, which sounded good.
Yeah.
But the Faith No More thing, and actually Suzanne Savage from Rhino, I literally stopped the space bar and said, yeah, this doesn't sound good. And we're like, oh my God, we just lost all of our work. We had just put all this money into the system. You know, we had all the candles going. We were going to impress people. And it just really fell flat. And at that point in time, I somehow have the wherewithal saying, listen, if you can give us the multi-tracks, we can actually do a proper mix. So she gave us the multi-tracks. We did mix it. And to the point where she listened, she goes, okay, now that's an Atmos mix. And actually after that, because nobody was asking for that mix, subsequent to that, the label got on board, the band got on board, and they actually released Epic and Easy and
Midlife Crisis.
So again, you know, it was kind of a build it and they will come idea, but we really took a big leap of faith to kind of get started.
Yeah, and in terms of what we had to throw away from stereo,
oh my goodness,
so much. I mean, we could spend the next hour talking about nothing but things that we had to retrain ourselves on. But suffice to say that you very quickly learn when you start doing something in Atmos, and you just have all these expectations of what it's going to sound like, and it's built up over, for a lot of us, you know, I don't know where everybody's at in their sort of engineering journey on here, but for a lot of us, it's a lifetime of you built this tool set and you rely on these tools every day, and then you start doing all the things that you're used to doing that work nearly all the time for you in stereo, and it falls apart in Atmos. And then you go, well, crap, now I've got to, you know, I thought that I understood how to build this house, but now I've got to sort of tear it all down to the foundation and take a look at the foundation and go, okay, is this working? And then build the first floor, and then stop and stand back and go, okay, is this working? And then tinker with it and sort of rebuild everything from the ground up in order to get what we'd consider to be a successful, great sounding Atmos mix.
Yeah, and following our approach of just failure after failure, we actually mixed B-52's song Love Shack. And so Will and I had to recreate the analog vibe of the original mix on all digital equipment. We didn't have any outboard stuff we could run it through. So we had to recreate that mix exactly. And that took quite a bit of time to do that. And then Will and I were like, okay, we got Atmos, let's spread it all over the place. And we were super excited, like kids in a candy store.
Yeah, you would think with that song, like you think about the song and there's just crazy stuff going on all the time. We're like, this is going to be awesome. We're going to throw this stuff all over the room. It's going to be so impressive.
Yeah.
And then
the whole thing collapsed like a bad souffle. I mean, literally the whole thing just fell apart. And we found out that you do need to have some of these older catalog things have to be kind of front stage centric. You've got to have kind of the foundational elements there. And then you can gently spread out things, like we spread out the ambient vocal tracks with the gang stuff, and there's some horn stuff and things like that. But we really had to learn how to very judiciously open things up. Stuff from the catalog also, by the way, people are very enamored with, and they have a feeling about those songs because they've been around so long. So there's a feeling to it. So we're taking a stereo mix and spreading out to Atmos, and we have to still keep that intrinsic feeling. Even though it might sound different, it has to feel the same way. And we know because of the B-52s track, we brought friends in who are fans, and the first pass, they're like, no, not happening. It doesn't feel like Love Shack to me. Like, what? And so we had to re-envision it again, and we got it to where people could hear it in glorious Atmos and still feel like the original vibe from the stereo mix. And again, that song took us 3 days to mix in Atmos. That's crazy, but that was the learning curve to get to that point.
Yeah, and I think early on I said something to the effect of, our job when we're working on catalog stuff, the frontline new release stuff can be a different story entirely. But when you're working with catalog stuff, and especially something like Love Shack, which is a song that is beloved and internationally known, our job isn't to reimagine it. Nobody was looking, nobody came knocking on our door going, hey, Matt, Will, could you put your stamp on Love Shack? That's what we're really looking for here. What they wanted was something that would make people feel that nostalgic feeling they felt for it, all these years. So it was a process of learning, how do we make something that, if you listen to the stereo and listen to the Atmos, you hear, I don't want to necessarily say an improvement because a lot of people are attached to, but a sense of space, a different perspective of it without taking away the vibe that gives you that feeling that you want to have when you're listening to Love Shack. And I know I was terrified when we were working on that. Like, part of the 3 days that we spent, Matt will say all the time that he's like the mix with his elbows guy. He gets in there and does what feels good, and then I'm more the details guy, and I come in and go, that was a great idea, maybe we dial it back a little bit. And I was going nuts over some of the details of this because I'm a huge fan of the song, and I wasn't satisfied with how it sounded. And Matt kept going, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. I kept saying, it's not. And I finally said to Matt at one point, I was like, we cannot be the jerks who ruined Love Shack for the next generation of listeners.
It's totally true. It's absolutely true. Yeah, I think Will has always said our basic tenet is do no harm. And we don't have an imprint or a sound. We've mixed, ugly metal to pop and everything in between. And we don't want anyone ever to go, oh, that's a Will and Matt mix. Definitely don't want that. We just want them to feel like it's an improvement or an exploration on the stereo mix. Now, some of the newer frontline stuff that we've been giving more latitude and things that we could do, which is really, really great. But I do want to address one thing that with people who are mixing in stereo and you want to get into Atmos, the best illustration I can tell you of one of the first things is, say all of us in this group have a band and we're mixing that band and there's an acoustic guitar. Now, if we're mixing it in stereo, we're going to high pass filter that acoustic guitar with all the heavy metal guitars in there. So it basically sounds like a tuned tambourine. You're going to hear the top end of that acoustic. Now, if you solo it, you're going to go, oh my God, that sounds terrible. But in the mix, it sounds like an acoustic guitar. Now, once you get into Atmos, you can bring back all the body to the guitar. It has its own space and it becomes a very different sounding instrument. And all of the compression and EQ that we have to do to jam all the sound into 2 speakers now, and there's a lot that we do. We basically brutalize the mixes to make it sound good in stereo.
And loud.
And loud is such a major issue. Now with Atmos, you can spread it out. We can't hammer it. We can't put too much compression or limiting, and we can't go above -18. A lot of popular music is up to -6 and -5.5. That's like brick wall. It's just like, it just basically grabs you and shakes you. And now with Atmos, we're really bringing back what I believe is fidelity. There's extended, dynamic range, and things just sound lovely now. Anyway, there's other tangents, but I'll leave it right there.
God, there's so much to unpack from just those few minutes right there. But let's take it back to the beginning, if we could, for a moment. I don't know what inspired you to get involved in mixing and immersive. But I mean, for me, it was the first time I heard the Greg Penny Rocket Man mix. Right? I mean, lots of folks probably heard that. But I'm curious to see what got you thinking about immersive as the next step. And then from there, let's talk about how difficult it was to learn. I mean, you talked about bootstrapping all of your communal knowledge, with your compatriots, but there's a tremendous barrier to entry to get into this gig. So first of all, what made you want to do immersive mixes? And second of all, where do you start?
Right. Well, I'll start on that. So I heard Atmos probably 4 or 5 years earlier, and I had heard the Greg Penny Rocket Man thing. And in the Dolby Theater in downtown Los Angeles, it sounded incredible. When you have 10,000 watts of power and you've got 150 speakers, look, everything's going to sound great on there. It sounded great, not to diminish the work they did. It sounded great, but then we went to the other room, and there was an Amazon kind of fold down device, and honestly just did not sound good. And I was like, well, this isn't going to work, because if the only place you can hear it is a giant theater, it's not going to work. Well, fast forward over, a few years, they actually are starting to work it where you can do the binaural fold down into earbuds and headphones. And I still was like, okay, it's nice technology, but I wasn't ready to jump on board. Will and I went to our friend Brad Wood's space. He's got an Atmos room, and dear friend, and also he's mixed. He's worked with the Smashing Pumpkins, Liz Phair, a bunch of people. And he played us a Liz Phair song that neither Will nor I had ever heard before. And at the end, as the fade out, I was stunned at how emotional the track was. The emotional aspect of what Atmos does that's when I said, okay, we should start thinking about this, because I poo-pooed it for years. I was like, yeah, it's whatever. It's just a bunch of bells and whistles. But I had this feeling of a song I'd never heard before. And I said, okay, now we need to talk about it.
Yeah. Brad and I had become cycling buddies a few months before that. And Brad would keep saying to me on bike rides, he'd be like, I think you should really look at this Atmos thing. And I say to people all the time, like, if you talk to us in early July of 2021, both Matt and I would have said, yeah, this Atmos thing is a waste of time. We'd both lived through 5.1. Matt saw the end of Quad. We'd seen, we felt like we'd read this book and we knew how it ended. And Brad finally convinced us to come over and listen. And we both essentially had the same experience, where we looked at one another and went, oh, this is not what we thought it was. We thought we knew, we didn't know. This is a huge step up from previous attempts at this, and we want in. And it was all about the emotional impact. The technology is fascinating, and it's a lot of fun to learn, and I love diving in on the technical side of stuff. But if it's not going to deliver somebody, a listener, a better experience than what they can get from the technology that already exists, what are we doing? That's the whole point of music, is the emotional experience. And that's the thing that got us both on board. And, talk to us at the end of July 2021, and both of us are all in. It happened, really, it was that in the blink of an eye at Brad's studio.
Yeah, it really was. Yep. And interestingly, as a sidebar, the newest Dave Matthews album, we know Bruce Fuller, the manager, and we didn't realize until he heard that album in Atmos, he goes, oh, I can finally hear Dave. He goes, you got all these incredible musicians, and in stereo, everyone's playing, and you want to hear everyone's stuff. He goes, I feel like I finally love this record, this new record, because I really have a connection with Dave, because you got this center speaker, and there he is. And as a listener, you can kind of zoom in and hear all the stuff around you. But the fact you can really zoom in, and the singer is right there is really something that I think is exceptional and special about the Atmos mixing.
Yeah, and Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to follow that real quick, since you were talking about center speaker and vocal in the center speaker. I mean, going back to the days of 5.1, there was a common school of thought where you didn't put the vocalist in the center speaker because you didn't want that isolated. You didn't want people to be able to pull that out. So I'm sorry to derail you a little bit. If you could just talk about your philosophy about that for a second.
So, yeah, we were aware of the way music in 5.1 was essentially avoid the center speaker at all costs, and I think when we started, we followed that philosophy
because we were used to it.
You're used to hearing
Phantom Center, and that really does color. Actually, the EQ of the vocal changes too when you put it center.
Yeah, because there are phasing issues. right? We don't think about it because we didn't have a choice, but we're all fighting phasing issues for center imaging. It's why we talk about center imaging so much when we talk about, stereo speaker setups. And we've been correcting for it automatically for so long that it's just, this is one of a series of things that we've learned over time to go, we would do things the way we did them in stereo. And then I had an experience where I was listening to, I was in a Dolby theater and I was listening to some music playback in there. And one of the songs I listened to had the vocals in Phantom Center, and one had them in the center speaker. And the difference was stark. I so preferred the center speaker vocal, and I never thought that was going to happen. Now, part of that's because it's a big space, and obviously the effect of left, right versus center is going to be much bigger, and there's a reason why dialogue's always in the center speaker for movies. But that said, it got me thinking. And the next step of that thought was, why don't we use the center speaker? And it very quickly came into my brain that we don't do it because we're not used to it. It's not necessarily worse than what we had before. It's just not the same. And so we started experimenting. And it doesn't work for everything. We will often audition, should we do Phantom Center, should we do center speaker, and then pick which one works best. But I'll tell you that one of the upsides of using the center speaker is headphone translation. And with cars coming online with Atmos systems, center speaker is going to be a big deal, because the way they tune these cars is built around a center speaker philosophy. So there's a lot to think about there. I don't know that there's a right and a wrong to this. I just think that there's a lot of things about Atmos that have made both of us question a lot of our long-held beliefs about what works and what doesn't, and why we did things in 5.1 the way we did them, and why we didn't, and whether or not it's time to revisit those.
I love that. I love the posture of approaching something with less preconceived notions and doing the good old scientific process of like, let's see what I think. And so there's so much to talk about listening.
Yeah, great. Just a quick example. So we recently did a mix. It actually just got released, of the Romantics "Talking in Your Sleep," and if you know the song, it's a pretty almost equally doubled lead vocal all the way through. And I went, let's experiment with center speaker on this. Yeah, it was a disaster. It departed so far from what the original sounded like as to be unrecognizable. So immediately it was, nope, we can't do center speaker on this vocal. So it for sure is a thing that you have to tread carefully with. And and again, we're talking about a catalog thing there, and we sort of have a template laid out that we have to follow. Whereas if it was a new release, maybe we'd have more leeway to do what we want. But that's a good example of, we tried it, it didn't work, we went with Phantom Center instead.
There's so much more to talk about the listening part of it, and how and who and all those things. But let's take a second too to talk about how you are getting this material. What percentage, how often are you getting in track form versus stem form? How is that successful or not successful? Let's talk about that for a second.
I think as a general rule, anything that is catalog is going to pretty much be in multi-track, pretty much. And anything that's relatively new, say from 10 years ago forward, is going to be stems. Because obviously there are no stems for the B-52s. There are no stems for anything that's old, because no one made stems then.
Yeah, it was tape. So
it was tape. So
it was expensive.
And so it just really depends on what's happening. If it's a new thing, then we usually get the stems. If it's a newer, and we work from that. Obviously, we have much more control over the multi-tracks, but that also takes quite a bit more time, because then we have to basically rebuild the mix. And sometimes if people use different plugins or different sound sources, it's hard to recreate exactly what they have. So we do pretty much rely on people making good stems, which is a whole other issue. If we can work with the producer, like we did with the Jason Mraz stuff, John Alasia made exceptional stems, which made us sound like geniuses. We've had other projects that I won't name that we've had stems that were just exceptionally problematic, where they didn't sound anything like the final stereo mix. And it's like, we go, well, do we try to make this thing happen, or we say, listen, you just got to make us new stems? And we've had to have them send them back again and again to get it just right.
Yeah, and we're actually more and more, we're starting to do projects where we're doing both the stereo and the Atmos mixes, at which point, we can choose to either, obviously this is another thing there's no roadmap for right now. In the very short time we've all been doing this, the established workflow is, well, the stereo mix gets done first, and then the Atmos mix is downstream of that. When you're doing both at the same time under the same roof, well, you can make some decisions about which direction you want to go. And I don't know that we have any answers as to which is better at the moment, but it definitely, I will say, if we choose to do the stereo mix first, then obviously we can build the stems from that, or we can work straight out of our stereo mix sessions, and know that, this is going to be pretty close right out of the gate for the Atmos version. We've done it the other way around too, where we've done the Atmos mixes first and then created the stereo versions from that. And they both come with pluses and minuses. But we definitely, I think when we work on those projects that are the new ones where we're doing both, knowing that we're going to do both definitely affects how we approach the mix on either side, whichever one goes first, because what the trade-offs are going to be for the other format, and you want to build it into your process as early as you possibly can.
That's so interesting. I have one other mini question, which is, do you ever get, like I'm thinking about something that you might have the tracks for, but someone committed to a sound, and I'm thinking about your acoustic guitar description of a tuned tambourine. Do you ever get a tuned tambourine, and now that we have more resolution, more space, you're like, well, can't add it back?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I'm not sure about the tuned tambourine specifically, but I will say we did mix some Quiet Riot stuff. And it was really interesting because Will started first on this project, and the mixes sounded incredible. I mean, the low end, it was just like, this is amazing. And I sat there listening, I go, this is really great. And I flipped over to the stereo, I'm like, oh goodness, this is back in the cocaine heyday where all of the low end was rolled off and there was screaming high end. And this is one of those rare moments, and this happens time and every once in a while, where we go, okay, we had a beautiful sounding mix, but we can't keep that aesthetic because it's not appropriate for people who already know what the original sounds like. So we have to try to find a middle ground that's more towards the original vision of the stereo mix, and we can also just gently add a little more low end to make it a little more hi-fi. But again, it has to have the same feeling, and so we just can't be.
I thought I got the mix into a place I was like, okay, levels are good. I think everything's sounding cool. And because I had started, I was like, I don't want to get too far into this before Matt gets his ears on it, so we can commiserate on what direction to take from here. So I'm in our lounge area and Matt works on it for, I think it was maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And he comes into the lounge and he looks at me and he looked like he was about to kick my dog. And and he told me what he just said here, and I came back in, sat down and listened and went, oh my God, he's absolutely right. And even though I guess you could say technically what we did is better, and that's a loaded term for sure, it wasn't right. Right? It's not what people loved. So we had to go back to, and these were absolutely like you were talking about, Jordan, with the tuned tambourine thing. We would never have made the EQ choices they made left to our own devices. If you just handed us these tracks, we had no reference material to listen to. We would have made very different choices than they did. But that's, with the catalog stuff, that's not our job.
Yeah, and going back to, I want to diss Quiet Riot because honestly, Will and I were able to rescue an old mix that was Faith No More's Epic, which I produced and mixed, which I thought sounded abysmal once it was mastered because it was so high-endy and so compressed. And so the nice thing about doing that is that Will and I mixed it for ourselves. Nobody hired us. Nobody paid us. So we actually put all the low end back in because I made everything a tuned tambourine, including the kick drum and the bass guitar. So we were able to just on our own make it sound big and robust. It sounded gorgeous. And fortunately, we went to the band, said, what do you guys think? They really loved it. And of course, the label loved it. But we were able to do that because I was initially invested in it and I worked on it. We were able to remedy those wrongs. Yeah, because I produced it.
And because we had a very clear line of, you worked on it, those were your feelings, you were part of the creative team, the band signed on to it. The everybody who should have been involved in that decision was involved in it. And then we said, okay, we can release this to the public because everybody's behind it. It's a very different thing when we are tasked with doing what we did for Quiet Riot, doing what we did for the B-52s, and maybe some of the people aren't around anymore. Maybe there's just no interest in them digging back into their past. You know, there's a million reasons why people want to or don't want to be involved in a reimagining of their old material. And unless we have all of those ducks in a row, we're not going to try and relitigate creative decisions that were made and signed off on years ago.
Yep.
So what you're saying is that you want it all, but you can't have it. Except now you can't.
I see what you did
there.
Good
job. Yeah, I think the main thing that Will and I do anytime we sit down, we mix something that's generally from catalog, but usually we always put ourselves in the mindset of the people who wrote the songs, played the songs, produced the songs, mixed the songs. And we always really bow down to that.
Yeah.
Because they had a vision and it wasn't our vision. And we're here to support their creative endeavors in a way that just opens it up to more people. But we do not put our thumb on it anywhere. We really try to stay away from it, with the exception of newer artists who say, by the way, take it as far as you want to, which we've done, and that's incredible. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, if we're given permission to do it, if we're told by the stakeholders, yeah, we want you guys to use your imaginations and do something a little different from what was originally done. Yeah, we're stoked. Yeah. Of course we want to dive in and do that. Yeah. But absent that permission, it's first do no harm.
Exactly.
So let's take a closer look at that for a minute. What you're describing is kind of the perennial problem that mixers face, right? You have no control over what you get. If you're remixing a chestnut, right? Your boundaries are pretty well set. It has to sound like this, or people who know the song aren't going to like it. But let's remove the guardrails for a minute. If you had the ability to talk to the recording engineer who was working on recording the song, I'm talking about new material here, how would you approach advising a recording, the recording process, knowing that you're going to mix it in immersive ultimately? Talk about that for a second. What would you, if you could put your thumb on the scale, how would you do it? What would you say?
Well, I mean, the main way we do it right now is we advise them how to put together the stems. So, if it's a modern thing, we say, listen, if you can build the stems a certain way, give us more kind of latitude and leeway to, manipulate things. And we do that, but we haven't really talked to anybody as they're beginning the production of anything yet.
Yeah, this is a thing. This is even newer territory. It's so new that the land we need to walk on kind of doesn't exist yet. How you're going to produce from the beginning for Atmos kind of requires a feat of imagination right now, because based on the way modern music is recorded with all the overdubbing we do and all that stuff, it is next to impossible to monitor while you're recording in Atmos. So you have to basically be a producer who has a really good knowledge of what things are going to sound like in Atmos, having done a bunch of work in Atmos yourself or immersive, and then imagine how the things you're recording are eventually going to work when you can spread them out, because you're not going to hear the results immediately. That is probably going to change in the relatively near future, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
And So and then once we get to that point, then we enter the phase of experimentation about what works and what doesn't. Think about all the crazy stereo mixes and productions that were done in the late 50s and 1960s while we were establishing a language of production based on what worked and what didn't in stereo. Somebody had to make all the mistakes so that we could all stand on their shoulders and go, oh, you know what's cool? Let's record this thing twice and put one in one speaker and one in the other. No, you can't make a copy because that's just mono. Like all this stuff that we take for granted is 60 years of shared knowledge that we don't yet have any of for Atmos. So it's, okay, now if I'm recording a doubled guitar left and right, do I want to record 4 of them now so I can go left, right, left rear, right rear? Do I want 6? Yeah. So they're coming left, right side, left rear, right rear. How is that going to sound? Is it appropriate for this song? Might it be appropriate for another song? There's so many questions we have to answer, and we're only really going to start answering them as we experiment, and some things work and other things don't.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is that because we cannot monitor in real time in Atmos. We can do it in 5.1 or 7.1, like a facsimile, but if you want to actually sit in Atmos and play guitar to it, that hopefully in a year or so, the latency will be so minimalized that you can actually do it. Because to me, that would be the most exciting part of recording for the modern day and into the future, is to actually be in a room, stuff is moving around you, you're playing guitar, and you tell the producer or engineer you want your guitar to be somewhere over here, and you want the keyboards to fly around you. That's going to be exciting, I think. We've been thinking about this for 6 months. We've been envisioning, how can we do it? Will and I actually drew up a microphone tree to capture drums in Atmos. So I mean, we've been dreaming about this, but we can't pull it off yet. We even have a band. My friends in Hoobastank, I was going to volunteer them to be part of this first recording. They're like, we're going to record in Atmos. We can't do it quite yet.
Yeah.
Even if we can't record or overdub in Atmos, are there things that you see that are common things that you run into? I won't say mistakes, but mistakes that people get that, if you can be cognizant of this in recording, that are going to translate better in Atmos?
So I don't know if it's necessarily in recording, is just in the production in general, even in the mixing process. Stuff like, if you can think about getting back to the center speaker thing, one of the things that we tend to ask for if we're working on a new release thing is, if you're going to make stems, could you please put the lead vocal on its own stem? And then any effects that are attached to the lead vocal, could we have those on their own stem? So, because if you deliver us a lead vocal with all the effects on one stereo stem, then we are locked into using Phantom Center, because we can't pull the effects apart from the vocal and have it be okay in the mix. It's going to sound terrible. But if we have them separately, now we can make the choice ourselves. Do we want to use center speaker? Do we not want to use center speaker? Is it going to work for this? Isn't it? Other stuff, I mean, I feel like we've been able, like with Epic, Epic turned out to be a brilliant song, even as a song that was recorded, 1989? Right?
1988 on 24 tracks. Yeah. It
turned out to be a wonderful production to put into Atmos. And a big piece of that was that Matt, at the time, never imagining that we might be doing this all these years later, recorded quadrupled rhythm guitars for the whole thing. So we were able to do 2 guitars in the front, 2 guitars in the rear, and it opened up the mix tremendously. I would say with drums, not necessarily in your drum stem, baking in your room sounds and your reverbs with the drum stem. And even maybe splitting the drums out a little bit more, not so much because we want to spread the drums around the room, but because we can take a dry drum kit and add an Atmos reverb to it that makes it sound like you're sitting in a room listening to a drum kit. And we can very closely recreate what vibe you had on it. But if it's all baked in, we have to keep all those pieces together because there's phasing issues and all sorts of crazy stuff that can happen as you spread things out.
And part of the problem with the baked in stereo drum stem is that, as Will was saying, we have cinematic reverb, which basically starts at the front and moves its way to the sides and to the back and up top. So it's actually an incredibly powerful tool. And if we have some separated out like a snare drum and other things like that, we can actually have it where you hit the snare and actually you can hear it kind of come around you.
Yeah, or even just provide us with those stems so we can activate a reverb with them.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of stuff like that. And the other thing to keep in mind is if you're mixing and listening the entire time through a ton of compression and limiting and all that stuff, the levels of things are going to subtly adjust when we're in a position where we don't have to use all that compression and limiting. And I'm sure a bunch of people are going to scream, oh, but so much stuff depends on compression and limiting. And boy, did I think that too, until we started mixing and everything that we got in that I went, all right, well, at some point we're going to have to put a ton of compression on this. We're going to have to limit the heck out of it across the whole mix. And then we would do it and it sounded bad. It's the amount of destruction we are doing to things to make them loud is crazy. And once you lower the level of a stereo mix to match up with where the Atmos mix is, and then you apply compression and limiting to the Atmos mix, it's not as good as you think it's going to be. Yeah. And most of the time we end up being much more gentle, even when we're looking for that thing we all think we're looking for out of compression and limiting. It turns out it's not what we think it is. And there's another thing that really surprised us. There's another tool that we had to adjust our expectations on.
Yeah, and one more thing too, regarding the Atmos, the thing that's come back with this whole dynamic range is there's sometimes we get these stereo mixes where there's a quiet part, which is really loud, then the chorus comes in and it's the same volume, and then we go back to another quiet part. So it's just this thing where it's consistent. Whereas with Atmos, the quiet part's actually quiet. So when the thing comes in after it that's louder, you go, oh my goodness, there's the chorus. And it's really lovely to hear music again that actually breathes and does have dynamic range. I think it's really, it kind of allows the band or the artist to do exactly what they intended to do before you had to kind of jam it into this like super hyper compressed space.
Awesome. I want to do a quick time check with Maureen, because we could probably do this all afternoon, but I want to make sure that we're still staying within our guidelines. Maureen, how are we doing?
There are a lot of questions, but want to cover a couple more topics that you had?
We'll try to be brief.
Yeah, we'll try to be more brief.
Okay, there's a first. Like get an engineer talking about their stuff, right? I'm going to cut to my last question. We have been talking about Atmos and all the various flavors of down mixes that you can do within Atmos. Atmos, it seems to me, has almost become like a term like Xerox, where it's become the generic name for this style of production. So in terms of formats, are you working exclusively toward Atmos mixes, or are you doing things for other formats? Are you doing things in linear? Talk about your approach to immersive and how it applies to the other formats.
So,
and mastering, sorry, and mastering.
Honestly, we do what we're asked to do. And we don't get hired to do a whole lot other than Atmos. And I think if you talk to most immersive mixers, that's going to be the same story. There are other formats out there. There's the 360 RA, which is Sony's version of immersive. And there's ambisonic that's been around forever. But nobody is coming to us knocking on the door saying, hey, can you do an ambisonic mix for us? And over time, there have been fewer people knocking on the door asking for 360. So at least for the time being, it looks like this is a sort of a VHS and beta race, if we can go back to the 1980s, and Atmos looks, at least for the time being, like it's going to be the VHS. It's where we're gonna land. In terms of the how it differs is, most everybody is most concerned about the Atmos mix, so everything else happens downstream of that. We could do some bespoke stuff for instance, a 360 RA mix to make that sound better, and of course we're going to address all that stuff, but we're basing it off the mix we did for Atmos because that's the thing that is at the top of everybody's list when it comes to immersive right now. in terms of mastering, that is a fraught question right now, because we're given a very strict set of guidelines for loudness,
and a strict budget too.
And a strict budget. You know, we will deliver things at those, you know, so they meet all the necessary guidelines, and then downstream of that, whatever the stakeholder, be it a label, an artist, whoever, whatever they want to do, if they want to master, great. If they feel like they can improve on what we have by having somebody master it, by all means, go ahead and do it. But in our experience, as far as we know, nothing that we've worked on that's been released has gone to mastering. Doesn't mean it hasn't. We just haven't been told about it if it has.
Yeah. It's just like stereo. It's just like stereo mixes. You know, if we were mixing for stereo, we turn it in, and the label does what they do with it.
Yeah.
So, and there are people out there who are obviously very, very talented at the mastering. Michael Romanowski is one who also was, I think, one of the early proponents of Atmos, and really, I think, paved a lot of the way that we can follow in his wake. And you know, because he worked, I think, closely with Maureen in the Academy. So, there's definitely talented people out there. So,
yeah, it's just right now it's. Again, it's one of these areas that is under construction in terms of how it looks for this format, as opposed to what it looked like for stereo.
So to follow on that, you're delivering something to the labels, and then it's their choice as to whether they want to master. Are you doing a separate mix for stereo, or are you just doing Atmos and it spits out all the derivatives? Because I've noticed an issue with the down mix in stereo coming from Atmos.
So the stereo down mix from Atmos, this could be a very long answer. I'm going to try and make it short, but it's probably not going to be satisfying for everybody. The stereo down mix from Atmos doesn't necessarily tick all the boxes that people expect after 60 years of working in stereo. We got very, very, very good at creating stereo audio, and trying to derive it from something else presents a big set of problems. So right now, the approach is generally the stereo mix is its own thing, because let's be completely honest here. That's where everybody's bread is buttered right now. Immersive isn't making or breaking everybody's records. It's stereo that is. And until that shifts, stereo is going to continue to be very, very important. So we're not expecting that we're going to deliver the ADM file, which is the deliverable file for Atmos, and that the stereo version that you're hearing is derived from that. No, there's a bespoke stereo mix that exists. And what you're deriving from our Atmos mix would be, if you have a 7.1 system at home, that's being derived from our Atmos mix, or a 5.1 system. Or when you're listening on headphones, that's being derived from our deliverable.
But the good news is that Dolby has done such an exceptional job of deriving a stereo mix. When we did the first Dave Matthews album in Atmos with John Alasia, and I have to say the stereo rendering of it was gorgeous. It was really, really beautiful. Now, does it sound exactly the way they envisioned it? Probably not, but it sounded really good. And so kudos to Dolby for that.
Yeah, the technology is advancing, and we're working closely with Dolby to make the stereo down mix better, so that over time we don't have to be doing two mixes for a single song. But I think we'd all agree we're not quite there yet.
We have a million questions to ask you.
Yeah.
But before we take up everybody's time, let's get some questions from the room.
All right.
I know we have a lot of. Oh, I see Roma in the chat. Speaking of, what are our questions? Okay. Are there any video streaming platforms that allow for Dolby Atmos audio? For example, a music video with Dolby Atmos audio?
Not at the moment, but apparently there might be sometime in the future. Hopefully, something like YouTube might have it, but maybe I guess a proprietary version of it.
Yeah, for music videos, I believe the answer is still no. And I don't know this for sure. I'm not speaking for them in any way, shape, or form. But my guess would be that Apple is probably working on that, given the Vision Pro and how much muscle they put behind spatial audio, which, if you don't know right now, the engine behind spatial audio is Atmos, so they're kind of one and the same thing, even though they have two different names. That may not be the case in the future, but it's going to be for quite a while. But if you're talking about TV and movies, Netflix is Atmos. I don't know about Hulu or Amazon Prime or any of those, but I know that everybody, when they're talking about getting deliverables for film and TV, streaming services are all asking for Atmos.
Whenever someone develops the technology where I can mix with a Vision Pro or some equivalent in spatial, let me know.
There you go. All right, another question?
Yeah, do you want to take one, Glenn?
It's all you, Jordan.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's see what we got here then. How about regarding mixing for the room versus mixing for headphones, and more than anything, mixing for spatial audio? How much time are you spending in headphones compared to the room?
That's a good question. It really varies and depends on the project, but we spend, I would say, 25 to 30% of our time on headphones. We definitely go back and forth because we can get it to sound great in the room. And that's pretty much, that's the king, that's the gold standard. But we do need to make sure that the binaural fold down sounds really, really good. And it usually does. So we do spend time doing that. That's really important.
Yeah, I think this is actually a really important topic. Certainly when we worked in stereo, it was kind of the speakers are king. Now, even though right now the vast majority of our audience is going to be listening to immersive on headphones or on an Apple device, the speakers are still king. And here's why. Even though most people do not have an Atmos setup at home, there are a number of things that are true. Number one, the speaker mix is never going to change. The mix you do today on your Atmos speaker system will be what the mix sounds like 10 years from now.
And in other studios.
And
too.
in other studios. Yeah. The headphone mix will change.
It has.
And has. Apple updates spatial audio regularly. So if you're listening through the spatial audio binaural, either with Audio Movers or through Logic or however you may do it, you are taking a risk that every move you make in your mix is going to sound A, not necessarily good in the speakers, B, Apple may change that mix or the algorithm that builds that mix so that 6 months from now, those choices aren't necessarily right anymore, because what they're doing is driving towards making the headphone experience more and more like the room experience. So the room, it needs to be the thing that sounds good to start with. Can you make some tweaks for and by the way, the Dolby binaural or AC4 file, that's what you're hearing on Tidal and Amazon. And then Apple spatial audio sounds different from that. So you do have to be able to check both. But we, as a rule, speakers are number one. The Dolby binaural is number two, because that sounds to us, and great minds can disagree on this, but to us, it sounds more like what we're doing in the room.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily in terms of spatiality, but just in what it's delivering us and feeling than the Apple mix does. So we stick with that. Also, the Dolby binaural doesn't change nearly as often as Apple spatial does. Yeah. So if you're working on headphones, you need to get yourself into a room with a speaker system to double check that the decisions you've made work on speakers, and then make tweaks to make sure they do. And just to give a concrete example of that, I have spoken to people at Dolby who have said they have had mixers come listen to their mixes in a car, turn to a Dolby employee in the car with them and say, "What did you do to my mix?" And the Dolby people have to then ask, did you ever listen to it on speakers? And they say no. And the Dolby people have to, much like Matt having the face of kicking my puppy, have to turn to the mixer and say, this is what it always sounded like.
Yep.
And as more cars hit the road, you need to worry more about speakers. As more affordable systems are developed for homes, like Sonos has an expandable system now over Bluetooth. Sennheiser has a soundbar that works in Atmos. Bose has one. There are more and more things coming online that are going to make the speaker mix more and more directly important to consumers.
Okay. Jordan, can I take one?
Glenn, I see that hand.
So somebody asked, well, there are a number of gear questions.
Okay.
And I wanted to talk, I mean, you're in interviews all over the place talking about this speaker and that, room treatment, whatever. But I'm curious to see if you can give us a synopsis about DAW that you use and how you use it. Like, are you using two systems, pitch and catch, to do your mixes? Talk about, you already talked about how much you mix in headphones and why you need to have speakers, but can you just give us a brief gear lowdown?
Well, I'll start and then you can. So when we got going with this thing, it required a pretty substantial investment in money. And we know that there are people that you can spend upwards of $100,000 on speakers, just speakers alone. And I didn't have that kind of money. So we researched, when I say we researched, I mean Will researched the speakers. And we found this company named Kali, K-A-L-I. And they're basically Charles,
Yep.
yes. Yeah, people who used to work at JBL, and they started their own speaker company. And in Will's words, and I agree, that they punch much higher than their weight, and they sound really good. We had to get in without spending a lot of money, and so the Kali speakers are exceptional. We've got the Antelope right now, which is our
Yeah, we're using so our interface and our monitoring setup and our B chain meaning the EQ and delay that's applied to the speaker array, but that you do not hear, as part of the mix. That's a post-production term that we on the music side aren't necessarily used to hearing a bunch, but it's very important in Atmos. So the Antelope is kind of our all-in-one box that's handling our monitoring. It's handling our B chain, EQ, and delay. And it's our interface. It's our HDX interface. We use Pro Tools as a DAW. We are only using one machine. We have always been a one machine shop. We got in right at the point where computers got fast enough that you didn't have to run a separate, what Dolby would call an RMU unit that just ran the Dolby software while you had a separate rig that ran your DAW. So that's the way we've been doing things from the start. We use, with Pro Tools, we're still using the separate renderer rather than the onboard one that's just been added in the last two versions of Pro Tools. Mostly because there are aspects of our mixing workflow that the internal renderer in Pro Tools and any DAW can't handle yet.
And for the Antelope, we're using the Galaxy 32.
Galaxy 32, yes.
Yeah.
And we have their MRC monitor controller.
Yeah.
I've got one about building the mix. When you're building an Atmos mix, do you use or make both beds and objects, like a film or a movie mix, or just stay with the objects or beds?
This is another one of those things that has evolved over time. In the beginning, and it all has to do with, as our knowledge increases, we experiment with different things and see are the results, and it's really based around workflow. So the first thing I want to say is, and this is based on exhaustive first of all, talking to Dolby. Second of all, exhaustive testing on our own, just to double check for ourselves, along with, and I want to mention Matt Hennessy, who's an Academy member and good friend of mine, who did an incredible deep dive on this to be certain that what we thought was true was actually true. The sound, people have said, oh, things sound different in the bed than objects. Nope, absolutely untrue. So if you want to use objects for your entire mix, fine. If you want to use the bed for your entire mix, well, there's some downsides for that. Mainly, the bed is only 7.1.2, so you don't have access to all 4 or 6 of your overhead speakers, depending on the size of your array. But you can do it, and sonically, you're going to get exactly the same results, minus the panning situation. Currently, we use a series of object beds. When we started, we were using the bed, the 712 bed for our head level speakers, and objects for the overhead speakers, and then objects for anything that was sort of in between speaker positions or moved around the room. We will use combinations of things to this day if they're the best way for us to solve a specific mixing problem. So again, I'm sure it'd be great if we sat here and went, here's how you do it, and this is the right way, and that's the wrong way. The truth is, it's what works best for you in your situation. But just go in armed with the knowledge that you're not paying any kind of audio penalty for using one or the other. I did get clarification recently that if you're using, and this is going to go way over a lot of people's heads, and it went over mine at first too, so if you don't understand it, that's fine. You may never run into it. But if you're using an arrayed system, so for instance, a system that has multiple speakers doing the job of a side speaker, like in a movie theater, multiple speakers doing the job of a rear speaker, if you use the bed, the 712 bed, and pan something to the sides, that array will act as if it's one speaker and play the volume of that thing the same out of each one. If you use an object, it will pan through as if they're separate, discrete speakers. If you put it directly in the side speaker, it will play only from the actual side speaker, not from the full array. And I know this is something post-production mixers think about a ton, because obviously most movie theaters are arrayed setups. Music, not so much. And in talking to a bunch of people at Dolby and at, well, someone who used to be at Dolby who's now at Apple, we tend to not worry about, oh, is this going to get played on an arrayed system? And when our stuff has been played back on an arrayed system, it sounds perfectly fine.
I'm curious about, okay, do you have one, Glenn?
After you. I
was just going to say, just for people at the beginning stage of their immersive journey who are interested, I had somebody ask, are there any consumer-friendly headphones that you recommend for dabbling into mixing for Atmos via Logic or Pro Tools? Is there anything that comes to mind for someone that we were talking about that's such a steep learning curve, both in gear and in technical knowledge? But what would be helpful for somebody at the beginning of that?
What do you mean, the Apple AirBud Pros,
I mean,
right? I mean, those the Pros.
We use for our headphones at the studio, we actually have AirPod Maxes.
Yeah,
and right. But here, I think this might be more sort of getting at the heart of the question, which is you don't need special headphones to listen to Atmos. You don't have to buy Apple headphones to hear binaural. The only thing that the Apple, and let me make sure I get the list right, the at least Gen 3 AirPods, AirPods Pro, and AirPods Max will do that other headphones will not is head tracking. Yep. So the thing where, and I think most people have experienced it with, like, if you're watching Netflix and you turn your head and the sound stays with your device instead of staying with your head, that's head tracking. Mm-hmm. And for Atmos, the sort of party trick that Apple can do is you can turn your head, and it is as if you are sitting in the middle of the speaker array. So what was in the front, if you turn your head to the left, now it's on the right. Yep. Rear speakers are on your left, side speakers are in front of you. Yep. And that can be a really cool thing. Some people love it, some people hate it. But in terms of mixing, you do not need them. You can use whatever headphones you've been using right along. But you're going to mainly be listening to the binaural headphone mix. You're not going to be able to really hear what's going on in Apple Spatial because of a number of technical issues that exist in the way the live Apple Spatial fold down is created. For that, you would have to have one of the special sets of headphones. That probably isn't going to be true again forever. It is only true for right now.
You've talked over the course of our discussion, you've talked about some of the pitfalls and some of the workarounds and things that you've encountered in learning how to do this mix. There's some well-known sand traps, right? Like you don't put something in the rears midway between the height and the ear level speakers, there are issues there. The height speakers are data compressed, so there are some issues there. Can you talk about how you work around that stuff? Like, what do you put in the heights? How do you avoid some of the
I mean, mostly in the heights,
there?
we put the information that's not absolutely essential to the mix. I mean, for us, we put all the stuff kind of left, center, right, and then around us primarily. And the heights are really like reverbs, effects. That's kind of the main thing.
And saying here, I feel like we get in trouble if we say, if you put something in a specific spot, it's problematic. Because it might have been problematic 2 versions of one kind of fold down ago. It might not be a problem anymore. There might be a different problem now in a different spot. So I feel like a lot of those kinds of things, you kind of have to just close your eyes and say what sounds good and trust that eventually the technology is going to catch up with what you feel is the right creative choice to make. And everything is data compressed when we're talking about what's coming back off of Apple Music, right? We're delivering for a roughly 3-minute song with an average number of objects in it, which might be anywhere between 20 and 40, it's a gigabyte plus file that we're delivering, right? The file that's coming back off of Apple Music is megabytes. So everything is massively data compressed. The heights may be more than other things, but we'll put stuff in the heights if it's fun to put up there, and it feels like the right creative decision to make. Most of the time, we're not trying to get you to look at the ceiling while you're listening to the music. At least that's been our experience. Is the stuff that we put up there has to work in a musical way, and for anything that is a sort of underpinning important part of the song, it's probably not going to be in the height speakers.
Yep.
There's so many
also
great
really
questions.
quickly, for the Dolby binaural fold down, you'll notice EQ changes. That's part of the psychoacoustic tricks they do to create the Dolby binaural version, is as you pan up, it's like you put a tilt EQ. So you don't want to put like low frequency information in the heights. So there's those things to take into consideration as well. And we're always balancing what works in the binaural, the headphone mix, with what's working in the speakers.
Go ahead, Jordan.
Well, there are a lot of people asking about how, there's a lot of questions about how to charge for these. And I'm curious about, share as much of that as you'd like to. This is a, very insular kind of engineer producer world. So also, like in terms of budget of having to convince labels or artists sometimes that this matters, that must have an implication on what they're willing to pay sometimes. How do you handle navigating that?
Without getting into too many specifics, I'll just tell you that we charge twice as much money if we're mixing from the multi-tracks, or half as much money for the multi-tracks as we mix from stems. So that's the main thing. And yeah, look, the budget implications are really, really substantial, because oftentimes we've had, at least initially, if somebody wants to do an Atmos mix, the band says the label's going to pay for it, and the label says the band's going to pay for it. And sometimes there's so much infighting, or they're saying we're renegotiating our contract, so we can't do anything right now. And so Will and I are just really sensitive to that. And sometimes we'll reduce our rate a little bit, even to get people to do the first Atmos mix. Say, look, we'll give you a break, do it. If you like it, here we go. And we've even done things where we said, listen, we've done stuff for free just to kind of get things moving forward. And then ultimately we start getting paid for things. So, and look, the bottom line is, because the two of us work together, which I think makes for better product, financially is not as good as someone working by themselves, because we have to split everything 50-50. But we've honestly have never gotten into this for the money, ever. Because if we did, we would take a very, very different approach. The amount of time and detail we put in our mixes, honestly, is ridiculous from a financial standpoint. But we love the music. We love doing this. And we'll stay extra time, extra days to get it right. And it's never been about the money. So if you're in it for the money, probably the wrong job to get into. If you love music, you will always be paid enough. You will always be. There are some days where we mix stuff. Some days we go, oh my God, we mix this for free. We love it. We're doing this. Other days, $1 million is not enough.
Preach.
So that $150 you got for 3 days worth of B-52s was totally worth it.
Right.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's really true. That's really true. Yeah.
Looks like
They're
we're
gonna-
sort of, sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
I was just saying, there's a couple, if for a quick one before we close, there are a couple questions about file delivery. Do you want to just hit us with what file delivery?
Well, the main
formats that
file
you-
delivery, the delivery we send to the labels right now is the ADM file, which is usually around 1 to 2 gigs. So that's what we deliver to the label. It's got to hit, minus 18. And the big thing that's really important with Atmos is that you have to be ready for QC to contact you if there's any issues. With stereo, you just send it in, they do whatever the heck they want it with it. Now with QC, you're talking about you can't go above the minus 18.
Or there's two numbers actually. Yeah. There's an integrated level for the entire song that has to hit minus 18. They'll usually give you 1/10 of a dB or 2 in either direction, but you stray too far away and they're going to ding you for it and say, dude, print us a new one. And then there's a number called the true peak. So that's the highest point of any song. That can be no higher than -1. And that one, there is no wiggle room on. If you go past -1, done, you got to reprint it.
And the other QC thing is also how many objects you use, where they're placed, and they this thing now where people are trying to upmix, take a stereo mix and upmix it and make it quote unquote Atmos, and Apple is absolutely stopping that right now because that's not an acceptable Atmos mix in their mind.
They're pulling down hundreds, if not thousands, of songs that early in the sort of Atmos rush a couple of years ago, people went out and said, hey, we'll take your stereo file and make it into an Atmos mix. And that is not what Apple wants. They do not want that being representative of what spatial audio is. And they are pulling those down and saying, if you want these up, you have to have somebody mix them for real.
And same thing with the stuff that's sourced from a stereo mix. If you use AI to source and make a mix from that, they're actually cracking down on that as well. So
so the other piece of this is, and I know Maureen had mentioned this a couple of days ago, so I just want to touch on it. A new wrinkle that Apple has put into their level of QC. So some QC is done by labels, at least with the majors, and Apple has another layer that they do as well that isn't quite as detailed, but they have a few things they want to hit on. And one of the new ones is how you treat the LFE channel of your mix. You have to base manage your LFE. If you've been doing immersive mixing or really any kind of surround for any length of time, chances are you're doing this already, but they have gotten an inordinate number of mixes done by folks who don't understand that when they put something in the LFE channel, the headphones absolutely, yes, are using the LFE. So if anybody has said to you, oh, Apple Music throws away the LFE, absolutely not true. I have texted multiple times, multiple people at Apple to get multiple confirmations on this. They are using the LFE. Every binaural fold down uses the LFE. If you don't base manage it while you're mixing, so between it leaving your DAW and getting to your speaker, then you're getting a full range version of whatever you send to the LFE in the headphones. You're basically doubling that track. So they want that LFE channel rolled off. There is no hard and fast number about where to roll it off. They have implemented some amount of roll off, but it's way above what we would choose to do creatively. So you've got plenty of space to use whatever you want to use the LFE for. But if they get a mix in with a full range LFE channel, they'll send it back to you and say, do it again.
Yep.
So is your
this has been
cutoff
so much good info.
Sorry.
I have a question because there's a couple people asking about the -1 thing coming up in that you said. Can you clarify that, where that's applicable?
So that is, they're looking at the highest true peak point of a song. So basically it's the loudest moment of the song. And that can't be, and if you use the renderer, all of this stuff is metered for you right on the screen the whole time. You have access to it all the time. If at any point in your song it goes above -1 true peak, then you have to find that point, and whether you do it with limiting, whether you go in and adjust that specific spot, both approaches we have taken depending on the material, you need to get that number down to -1. So that, again, it's the loudest point in your song is never higher than -1 true peak.
Okay. So there's still a lot more questions, but wow, I had asked Will and Matt to be both entertaining and informational. I think they achieved that goal.
Thank you.
Well, we've had a good team here,
Yes.
between you, Jordan, and Glenn. I mean, you make us look like geniuses.
Yeah, thank you so much. A big thanks to our panelists and hosts, and to our tech team, Candice
The audience.
Yes,
Audience.
thank
River
you.
Kwan, and to the audience for being here and asking great questions. And remember, the plan for the forum is to be a monthly event, and we want to hear from you about your ideas for topics. So you can get them to us at, let's see, I put it in the chat. I'm just going to make sure I have the right. Can we put once more in the chat what the link is to send ideas to us? Yeah, that's right. pe.wing@grammy.com. Pretty easy. pe.wing. Remember the dot. Thanks so much, everybody. This was really great. Very interesting, enjoyable, educational, all of those things. Thank you so much to everybody on the screen and helping and in the audience. Bye for now.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
All right.